Here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around is another one for you Dawi lovers, as we're playing as the Stunties against the force of the Skaven on the map's Spite Reach. And as you can see, we've gone with honestly a bit of a generic build. There isn't really much to say for it. One of the main things I did want to try out though was see if we could sort of do a bit of a mixed build of with some iron breakers, some cannons to counteract enemy artillery, and then a few gyrocopters, because obviously in the match I did against Sudevil, he actually got some pretty good success out of them, and I kind of wanted to give him a shake in this matchup because I don't use them all that often, and I do think they have quite some potential here, and wanted to try them out. This build is very much oriented towards grinding my opponent down. If my opponent went with a whole bunch of Stormmen, Plague Monks, Censer Bearers, whatever. This build is definitely meant to win in the grind. Obviously, Stormmen will beat Longbeards, and they will do quite a number on miners, but that said, they're not the tankiest of infantry. They do have fairly low HP per model, and they're pretty clumped up, so potentially we could do a lot of damage with our blasting charges. We could definitely whittle them down with gyros, steam. We do have our Runes of Wrath and Ruin, and all that sort of stuff, so definitely some potential there. And to counter enemy lords, now this might seem a little odd, but one of the cool things that the Skaven do, or the Dwarves have, that is actually surprisingly decent at killing Skaven lords are Slayers, because Slayers have pretty high melee attack, reasonable melee defense, and more importantly, they just have very high HP, and they can just do a decent amount of damage fairly quickly. So you surround someone like Queek and you beat them down. Now going over my comp in full, Rune Lord on his toilet seat, which of course is huge. It negates another 15% of all Skaven damage. Basically, map wide, you've got 40% magic resist, which means most Skaven artillery, or actually all Skaven artillery, Censer Bearers and that sort of stuff, but does basically nothing to you. Master of Gruni for even more missile resistance, so Skaven artillery is even more pathetic. Master of Oath and Steel, because Skaven do have some nasty withering and that sort of stuff, which debuffs armor, so that's a nice counter. Master of Wrath and Ruin for the slows, crowd control, and damage against armored targets, and then Master of Navigation to keep our troops alive. Up in the skies, we do have the two gyrocopters, as mentioned before, who are doing a bit of a scouting run. Initially, I couldn't see most of my opponent's build. You can see how much of it was grayed out here. I could only see some of the cannons in the very back, and a handful of troops kind of cresting the ridge here, and you can see the cannons already teeing off because I left them on free fire. Our front line is composed of 4 units of Longbeards, not much to be said there, backed by a few miners with blasting charges, and then the Norgorlings Iron Breakers in the center. 2 cannons are there to provide anti-artillery support, and then Dragonback Slayers and Slayers are in the very back, providing further anti-large defense. And with this sort of staggered build and decent defense in depth, it really is pretty difficult for the Skaven to sort of suppress your artillery and fully overwhelm you. Now for my opponent, he did decide to go with a very wide and honestly kind of interesting build. Now this map, Spite Reach, not one of my favorites. I really am not the biggest fan of these maps. They're just bisected in the middle with a huge hill. And that's kind of what Spite Reach is. There's this little divot here, this little valley, but it's not very impressive. So you can see my opponent here kind of falls back. And honestly, this was a bit of a gentleman's agreement almost. I was pushing up slowly to get up on the hill. My opponent conceded the hill. And it was kind of, okay, we're not going to just YOLO in and fight each other on top of the hill without artillery support. So, well, we'll kind of both tow our artillery into position. And in the meantime, you can see my opponent pulling back. His front line composed entirely of Skaven Spears, so this inflates his numbers. It means he really outnumbers me, but obviously Skaven Slave Spears are not the most impressive units ever. They're not really going to be able to hold against the Dwarf Dawi for any amount of time. And you can't see the gyros there being shot up by the lightning cannons, but obviously with that magic resist, we're pretty tanky. Alongside that, my opponent does have 2 Gutter Runners with Poison. These are the Slinger variant, so they will be able to kind of shoot back at my gyros and potentially apply some pressure there. On the flanks, he does have, hidden in the trees, an Assassin as well as some Death Runners, and these guys will be breaking cover and attempting to sneak up on my flank shortly. And in the center, to make up the core of his army, he does have a Warlock Engineer, who does have the Warpstone armor, providing the AoE damage, a more descendant effect, Shadow Magnet Trinket, providing extra missile resistance to all his troops, Warp Lightning for the damage, Death Frenzy for the buffs, and then Crack's Call for even more damage. Alongside Queek, Headtaker, and 2 Stormmen. Queek, of course, is pretty brutal. It has Armor Sundering debuffs, has Stand Your Ground, Dwarf Gouger, and Trophy Head. So he's definitely able to sort of whittle me down, potentially. And maybe snipe my Rune Lord, which would be very unfun. There are also 2 Warblade cannons backed by Clanrat Spears with shields. I think the Spears with shields are honestly a mistake. I think, cost-wise, you're better off just bringing 2 vanilla Clanrats with shields. Because Dwarves don't really have that much large. Like, I guess I could YOLO my gyros in there, but that's not really going to happen. Regardless. Get to my opponent here, teeing off a little bit on my Rune Lord, and actually some of the shots are going to start overshooting and hitting my Iron Breakers, which is a bit of a misplay on my part, simply allowing my troops to get so close. But unfortunately, right now the artillery is doing more friendly fire than actual enemy casualties, and you can see the Skaven Slave Spear is going to be forced to sort of fall apart shortly. Some satchel charges will really persuade them to leave. On the flank, in the meantime, my opponent doing a very smart maneuver here, outflanking my gyrocopters, so they're not able to spot them. He has not popped his smoke bombs just yet. You can see in the meantime the Norgorlings Ironbreakers, you're being clipped by that overwatch from the Warp Lightning Cannons, and definitely this was a bit of a misplay. I really should have pulled back with at least the Iron Breakers, kept them in reserve, because there's really no reason to bleed such an expensive and valuable unit this early into the game. That said, the cannons are coming into position. You can see this is such a cool sight. This guy's like being screened by the Longbeards alongside him. They're just covering in for the cannon, and the Dwarf artillery is about to send some cannonballs hurling down towards those Warp Lightning Cannons to put the rat filth in its place. And there you can see the guns of the dwarves just opening fire, teeing off on the Warp Lightning Cannon, already to bring a gun offline, which is very, very significant. And my opponent is going to lose his artillery duel. He has no way in hell that he's going to win it. The Warp Lightning Cannons do not outtrade cannons one-on-one, and because he hasn't been getting these shots early, he hasn't been focusing to get my cannons to begin with, we've already got a head start, and now it's just going to start sloping in my favor even more. That said, the Longbeards are getting pounded a good bit, and it's definitely a bit of a slow grind. My opponent is kind of hoping that his Warp Lightning Cannons do more damage, though he is starting to bleed some major damage there. In the meantime, the Longbeards, I've kind of just committing Longbeards in against the Skaven Slave Spears, not overcommitting any reserves, though here with the Dragonback Slayers will be forced to retreat, and in their place we're going to push forward with some Longbeards, as well as the Gyrocopters, looking to zone away with these Gutter Runners, because one of the things you really don't want your Slayers doing is taking Pebbles to the face. They will do a lot of damage to those unarmored troops. In the meantime, the Warp Lightning Cannon is practically offline. Those cannonballs just piling in and smashing a rat filth that's trying to man the guns, and it's going to be breaking their leadership and forcing them to back the hell away. Elsewhere, the Skaven push is kind of being broken up. It's kind of being torn apart. You can see over here, though, a bit of an overextension. The Rune Lord definitely pushing a little further than he should with the Longbeards, but we are going to notice that and pivot around to retreat. Unfortunately, my opponent is sort of getting sneaking a few Skaven Slaves in here and there, but we are able to intercept, and the Longbeards, of course, are absolute beasts against this sort of trash, and we'll be able to put them in their place. And in the meantime, the artillery duel continues. Now, my opponent over here, using Gutter Runners to good effect, is able to force off the Gyrocopters. They really cannot stand and fight. People often overestimate the survivability of Gyrocopters. They've got that 100 armor, which looks really great on paper, but with only 2,800 HP, they cannot stand and tank Pebbles for days, and so they're going to be forced to retreat here. And I'm kind of going to let the Longbeards try to intercept and block these guys out. In the meantime, the Slayers are kind of postured over here, and you can see my opponent very, very patient, waiting with his Death Runners, waiting with the Assassin to commit. In the meantime, my artillery battery continues to pound the Warp Lightning Cannon, whittling it down, and it has gotten really, basically no value at all this game. In the meantime, the Stormvermin are pushing in, and suddenly those bursts of steam coming in. You can see already about 700 or 800, maybe close to 900 damage done to these guys with those gouts of steam. And that really does show how much, against clumped, albeit well-armored infantry, how much damage these guys can do. Gyro is definitely no laughing matter. They only cost 700 a pop, and they are paying for themselves here against these Stormmen. In the meantime, the Longbeards are on an intercept path. They will bog these guys down for an incredibly long amount of time, and in the meantime, a Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin going down. And over here, Queek Headtaker popping trophy heads on the Rune Lord and smashing him down, which kind of sucks. And this was a big mistake on my part. I should have kept the Rune Lord out of there. So this, children, is not how you play with a Rune Lord. This is how you play like a moron, like Wyvern. So what can I say? That said, the Stormmen completely buckle, wavering and routing as the Slayers push in. And my goal here with the Slayers was to get on top of these annoying Warlock Engineer, get on top of Queek, and put him in his place. Meantime, the Ironbreakers here is throwing some satchel charges, doing a little bit of damage. And in the meantime, the Slayers kind of posturing to block off. I was keeping them in reserve. They're there to block off the flank from the Gutter Runners, who I knew were over there. And it's very important to play it safe. When you know your opponent has sneaky shenanigans afoot, you don't want to commit all of your troops to the front line and leave your artillery exposed. Now, a bit of a misplay here on my part, to be quite frank. I do push in with the Ironbreakers and actually expose my cannon here, which is a huge, huge mistake. Last second, the Ironbreakers do turn around, and they are moving in to intercept these Death Runners. The Dragonback Slayers as well, committing to the push here, and you can see the Satchel Chargers plowing into the Death Runners. And these guys, Death Runners, not a bad unit. They're actually pretty solid. You can even see the drain effect there coming in from the Warlock Engineer, but simple fact is, these guys cannot hold up to the hatred of the Dragonback Slayers, who are just such a beastly unit. You can see they're cleaving rats down left and right. And the Assassin, while you might think he's tough, is not going to do a good job against the Ironbreakers in the long run. And there's, that said, a nice bombardment there, doing a lot of damage, and honestly very well played for my opponent there. Despite the very high magic resistance I have, obviously when we're clumped up like this in a box, we are very susceptible to damage. It basically hits every model in the unit, at which point, even with 40% damage resistance, you're taking way too much damage. That said, Warp Lightning Cannons are offline, which means my cannons have basically already paid for themselves. There isn't much more they have to do over here. The Miners, in the meantime, intercept the Gutter Runners and are forcing them back. Obviously, they can't. I don't think Miners can actually beat Gutter Runners in 1v1 melee, but they can force them off, which is really what matters. And in the meantime, the fight still sort of hanging in the balance. Now, balance of power swinging in my favor, but the Rune Lord is in full flight, being hit by another trophy heads, because my opponent has two. He has one on Queek and one on the Assassin. So despite those gyros, they're smoking away these Stormvermen. And the Slayers surrounding and beating down the Warlock Engineer, who was very, very squishy, very bad at defending himself. Despite all that, the Rune Lord at right on the cusp of death here, so things looking a bit grim for the poor Dowie, and you can see the assassin coming in there looking to stab him in his back. These filthy rats really focusing on him to the point that I'm forced to commit the air core, and they dive in, courageous, heedless of their losses, to push back Queek and the filthy assassin trying to sneak up on me. And we push him away, which saves the Rune Lord for the moment. Elsewhere in the meantime, the Dragonback Slayers kind of sitting around doing not very much. The Miners, though, constantly pressuring these Gutter Runners and sort of suppressing them, which is very, very important. And the cannons continue their song, pounding away at the artillery, weakening my opponent's troops, and having quite an impact. Over here, the Slayers are finally going to break this Warlock Engineer, which is very, very important, because we're going to remove this annoying Mortis Engine effect from the field. One of the big problems is that these Mortis Engine effects really work against Dwarfs. Magic resistance isn't going to reduce the damage too much. Honestly, I don't even know if it does. There isn't that much damage per tick to be reduced, so you're only doing like 1 damage per model or whatever. It obviously can't be reduced, so the Warlock Engineer there is doing a lot of damage, but we are going to be able to force him off, make him reconsider his life decisions, and make him flee from the field. And anytime the Rune Lord's still running for dear life, being hit by that constant chain of trophy heads, but the Dragonback Slayers are on point, looking to intercept the assassin, shut him down, prevent him from pursuing, and they're going to be able to get on top of him and start slowing him, which is not where he wants to be in life. And you can see the assassin only has I think base defense of like 35. So he's not, once that slippery expires, he is in for a very bad time. You can see the cannon there adding its weight to the fire, focusing on Queek. And if we look at the battlefield right now, my opponent is finally pushing into my artillery crews with the Gunners, shutting that power down. A bit of a misplay there on my part, actually, not keeping these Longbeards in check and defending. And another unit of Longbeards over here, way overextending, chasing Skaven Slave Spears of all things. So that's a huge misplay on my part there, which is going to cost me my artillery batteries here. So, well played to my opponent, shutting me down. Still not giving up, pushing after my Rune Lord, trying to shut him down. And I'm desperately chasing this assassin, trying to slow him and prevent him from escaping, or prevent him from catching my Lord. But he's getting on top of him, he's shanking the poor Rune Lord, hurting him bad. The Dragonback Slayers doing their very best to slow him down, but just not able to cut the mustard there. And the poor Rune Lord here, breaking, snapping his leadership down to nothing. He's broken. 56 HP left, 38. 1, and he's dead, and he's going to topple from his Anvil of Doom, and he's dead. So all of a sudden, balance of power should, or one would expect it to shift, but it doesn't because we're the Dowie, so we don't really give a damn. The balance of power is meaningless. We're the Dwarves, and and as you can see, the Norgoblins Ironbreakers, they're standing strong. The Dragonback Slayers, and of course the Gyrocopters providing a huge boost here. One might not expect it, but the mass and the speed means that we can punt these fools around, especially the Assassin and Queek, keep them in place for our infantry, especially the Slayers, to apply pressure to. And with his 20 armor, the Assassin's not going to hold out very well at all at Slayers. Slayers, they do well against these sort of squishy infantry lords or heroes. So he's not going to hold out too hot here. And now the Gyros are going to take back to the skies, start smoking these Gutter Runners. And we've kind of forced my opponent back. Now, certainly, my opponent has done some good work. He's managed to remove both my artillery crews from play, made them rout. These guys are down to 9 models, which is pretty terrible. But with the steaming of these poor Gutter Runners, some steamed rat on the menu here, we're going to be able to force these guys away. You can see pursuing them in melee, getting some rear charges. And at this point, it is going to be GG for the Skaven hordes as their leadership buckles against the Dowie. Those Longbeards are still in the back there, super healthy, and making their way back after overextending. But a victory for the Dowie. So, honestly, I think the strat, like, it's a decent build against Skaven. I'm not entirely sold on the Gyros. They were fun to use, but honestly, in hindsight, I might have just been better off bringing, like, Bugman's Rangers, or even Iron Drakes for that matter. Now, they did have a huge impact on the Storm, which was really cool to see. But like I said, I'm just not entirely sold that they're the way to go. As for the rest of it, well, the cannons got huge kill counts, 50 and 50, though a lot of that was just against crews. But they did wipe out the 2 warplaning cannons, which is immediately paying for themselves. They didn't have to do anything else. Cannon for a warplaning cannon is a plus 200 trade, essentially, for the Dowie. The Rune Lord did a huge amount of work before going down to the perfidious foe, and definitely 84 kills, not bad. Miners with 110 kills. Obviously, a lot of this was against trash, so I would take most of these kill counts with a grain of salt, but do keep in mind that these troops definitely held their own, definitely did well, even against some Skaven top-tier infantry, like Death Runners, like Stormmen, sometimes units like that. The Slayers, also, great unit, and I think Slayers are one of those units that actually have a really good place against Skaven, because they're great against all their large, because most of the Skaven large is very squishy. Doom Wheels, not so much, but against Doom Wheels, that's where you got cannons coming into play, or you can body block with gyros. But Slayers have that going for them, and then against Lords, especially squishy ones, like squishy heroes, like Warlock Engineers, like Caster Lords, especially like Skrolk, or a Grey Seer, against Assassins, against Plague Priests, all those troops, Slayers will do an amazing job as well, and really will perform very, very nicely, because they've just got such high melee attack, especially Dragonback Slayers, just so well kitted out to butcher them. And you can also bring Giant Slayers for that function, so and they will even butcher Queek and stuff like that, so they're not bad. But I definitely do like the normal Slayers for that combined anti-large and anti-infantry role. Now for my opponent, a very cool build, very wide and sort of very all over the place, but I can see what he was going for here. Trying to sort of swarm me from all sides, take advantage of his mobility, keep us some sort of front line to hold. But I do think there were a few small mistakes. One, I think the Clarinet Spears were just unnecessary. You don't need Spears, just bring normal Clarinets. The Death Runner flank kind of worked out with the Assassin, but I think it took a little too long. His artillery, if it had stayed online, might have had more of an impact, or more significant impact. But because my opponent was not able to shut down my cannon at all, it was far too little too late by the time they were taken offline, and the Warp Lightning cannons were gone. And so that was definitely rough. I also do think there's just a lack of sting power. There's not that much. Like, artillery won't necessarily cut the mustard, especially if your opponent has a Rune Lord. And if you have no sting power outside of that, only the Stormmen here are going to do great against Dawi. You could be in trouble. I think you want... There is the Mortis Engine effect, but I think you want a little bit more. Maybe some Deathglow Bombardiers, or some more Stormmen, or Armor Sundering effects, or something along those lines. As a small little caveat as well, one of my big misplays was letting this Warp Lightning cannon get 51 kills, especially against units that actually mattered. Like, I should not have let it get a single kill on the Ironbreakers, and really I kind of just allowed it to, because I let them push over the hill, and they took like 12, 15 losses before I finally took the guns offline, or my opponent changed target. So that was a misplay on my part. Regardless, well played to my opponent's spotting here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining and fun to watch. If you did, as usual, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and share. Be sure to leave your comments, criticism, all that down below. And I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.